Hello. Hi, I'm Michael Martin. I'm Director of the Center for Louisiana Studies. Welcome to the Femme Women of Louisiana Symposium. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? So the Center for Louisiana Studies has been engaged in promoting scholarly investigation into Louisiana's cultures and history through acquisitions, research, publications, and interpretation, alongside programming, which is what you're participating in today. We've been doing that since 1973. The center is composed of three divisions: the UL Press, which publishes between 10 and 12 books every year on Louisiana topics or by Louisiana authors; the Research Division, which oversees the Archive of Cajun and Creole Folklore and the Center for Louisiana Studies Image Collection, two of the largest collections on those topics in the world. That research division also engages in its own research projects and collaborates with people both inside and outside of the university on broader research projects. And then finally, our third division is the Special Projects and Programming Division, which works as a liaison with like-minded entities elsewhere and puts together programs like today. Before we get underway with the symposium proper, I'd like to offer a word of thanks. Thanks to the Hilliard University Art Museum and its staff for helping accommodate us and for facilitating the use of this beautiful A. Hayes Town building. Thank you to the College of Liberal Arts and its staff for helping us spread the word and for providing support in other ways. And thank you, of course, to the panelists who will be participating today. And thank you most importantly to you, the people who have shown up, taken time out of busy schedules to be here and take part with us in this symposium. Today's symposium originated in a conversation between myself and Marianne Wilson, who will be our first speaker in just a few moments. She and I happened to see each other the day she received her copy of the new book, Louisiana Women, Their Lives and Times, Volume 2. Marianne suggested we do something for the book, and we are. A book release party this evening beginning at 6. We invite everyone to be there, but also we have copies of the book available here as well. I agreed that we needed to do something for the book, and I thought maybe we could do something a little bit bigger. So I went back to the center and spoke with Assistant Director for Special Projects and Programming, Jennifer Guidry. I told her that we'd like to do something, maybe even a symposium, in conjunction with the book release event, and let her run with it. Today's symposium is a testament to her hard work and dedication, from taking a rather vague idea and within less than 2 months, making something real out of it. So I'm going to let Jennifer come to the microphone and tell you a little bit more about the planning process for this symposium.
Well, I just want to echo Dr. Martin's sentiments and thank you all for joining us today. It's really exciting, and thank him for those kind of words. And I didn't exactly run with it on my own. I ran to my nearest colleague in arms on this topic, Dr. Mary Farmer Kaiser, and said, okay, let's figure this out. Let's make a committee and get this ball rolling. And we did this, we pulled this together in a very short amount of time, and I really want to acknowledge our planning committee for all of their hard work, their dedication, their insight, and their guidance towards today's full day of topics and conversations. And those people are Catherine Edwards, Dr. Mary Farmer Kaiser, Tanisha Mallory, Liz Skilton, and Lena Suk. And so some of them are here in the audience. Some of them have a full teaching schedule today and will not be able to join us except here and there throughout the day. And all of you that are here, please, if you can't stay the whole day, stay for as long as you can. Come back if you find the window in your schedule later on, and tell everybody else what's going on over here. This day is about really hard conversations that we need to have, and I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to encourage those conversations, to start that dialogue, to get comfortable with these topics and start talking about them amongst ourselves and with all of our family and our friends outside and the rest of the community. So deep thinking today, as Dr. Farmer Kaiser said. So thank you so much, and we'll go ahead and get started with the program. We have Dr. Marianne Wilson starting everything off, and Dr. Martin's going to give her a brief introduction.
I'm back. So this is going to be a fun introduction because I had the opportunity to see Marianne just less than a week ago in Boston for a Society of the Study of Southern Literature conference that she invited me to participate in with the foreknowledge that I knew nothing about Southern literature. So I appreciate that, and I hope that my introduction does justice to Mary Ann. Mary Ann Wilson is the author of Gene Stafford, A Study of the Short Fiction, and the co-editor of North and South, Essays in Gender, Race, and Region, as well as numerous articles and book chapters on American women writers. Her most recent essays are Rebecca Wells' The Divine Saga, Deep in the Heart of Louisiana, which is featured in Louisiana Women, Their Lives and Times, Volume 2, and the forthcoming Redneck Feng Shui, sounds interesting, Duck Dynasty and the Other Louisiana, which will be in Small Screen South's Interrogating the Televisual Archive. That's forthcoming next year. Her research and teaching areas are 19th and 20th century American women and women writers, and most recently the cultural work of Louisiana women from 1880 to 1925, and representations of Louisiana in the media. She has won numerous awards, including the UL Lafayette Foundation's Distinguished Professor Award, a special award from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, the Friends of the Humanities Professorship in Humanities, which she held from 2010 to 2014. She's been featured in the Lafayette Independent as part of their Women Who Mean Business feature. She is a fellow of the Center for Louisiana Studies, and she currently holds the James D. Wilson Memorial Board of Regents Endowed Professorship in Southern Studies. And so with no further ado, I hand it off to Mary Ann Wilson.
You know, if you stick around a place long enough, you collect all that stuff. That was a nice introduction. I want to talk to you this morning about a little bit about scholarship on Louisiana women by Louisiana women. I see one of my women's studies students out there. Yay! And the exciting renaissance that I think is happening in scholarship about Louisiana women and by Louisiana women. So, since I gave this talk several years ago at the Ernest Gaines Center, there seems to have been a renaissance of scholarship by and about Louisiana women. From the accomplishments of Newcomb College graduates in Susan Tucker and Beth Willinger's History of Newcomb College, 1886 to 2006, which I brought a copy of on the table there, to the prostitutes of Storyville in Emily Epstein Landau's Spectacular Wickedness, Sex, Race, and Memory in Storyville, New Orleans, from LSU in 2013. And I used that book to the delight of my students in my course, humanities course on New Orleans. Much of the new scholarship about Louisiana women offers what I call hidden histories, stories behind the public facades of institutions and organizations, stories that involve women's quiet but powerful work behind the scenes, often in the years before they even had the vote, but also concurrent with the rise of second-wave feminism and the civil rights movement. Scholarship on Louisiana women and by Louisiana women does what all good feminist scholarship does. It recovers, it recuperates, and it reinstates the untold narratives behind the master narratives that are already in place. Feeding this scholarship, of course, are colleges in the state: Xavier, Centenary, UNO, Tulane, LSU, UL, that have at least an 18-hour interdisciplinary women's or gender studies minor, still in place despite the twin disasters of Katrina and recent budget cuts. Some offer at least a certificate in or concentration in women's studies at the undergraduate and or graduate level. UL now has a gender and sexuality studies minor in place in the College of Liberal Arts. McNeese State has one of the most active and productive women's studies programs, housed in the history department with its director, Janet Alured, who will be doing our brown bag lunch today and talking about her forthcoming book on second-wave feminism in Louisiana. Who knew, huh? Janet is working on a study of second-wave feminism in Louisiana, beginning in the 70s. And of course, she also co-edited with our own Judy Gentry, formerly from the history department, the first volume of Louisiana Women, Their Lives and Times, and both copies, volumes 1 and 2, are out here on the table for you to look at and hopefully to buy. Another local program is Nicholls State's Louisiana Center for Women in Government, which has offered since 1992 internships to undergraduates who are interested in women's leadership roles in politics throughout the state. The center initiated and hosts an annual National Women's Leadership Summit, held not only in Louisiana, but in neighboring states like Arkansas and further afield, even in Alaska. Women active in politics locally and nationally take part in these workshops and conference sessions. A shining light in the constellation of women's studies work, of course, is Tulane University's Newcomb College Institute, formerly Sophie Newcomb College. It is a repository of archival material on women associated with the college, women who taught there, as well as women who were employed in other capacities. The book I spoke about earlier, Newcomb College, 1886 to 2006, Higher Education for Women in New Orleans, traces a significant role that the college played in the city and in women's education more broadly since it was founded. In their foreword to the book, Willinger and Tucker revealed that they found much of their material in an office closet on campus. They go on to say that much information about women's civic and cultural roles has been buried in the papers and documents of men. Hence, the difficulty many researchers have in ferreting out material. A section of this book is simply called Lives, each chapter focusing on Newcomb College graduates and students and their work in the civic life and culture of the city. Examples are Shannon Freistack's chapter From Southern Lady to Steel Magnolia, Newcomb Women and the Struggle for Civil Rights in New Orleans, or Tanya Tetlow's memoir, Lindy and Me, about meeting and working with Lindy Boggs in the 1980s. Tanya's chapter on Lindy Boggs is in Louisiana Women, Volume 2. She calls it wielding great power by giving away all the credit. And that phrase refers to what the nuns used to tell her. You can get anything done in life as long as you're willing to give someone else the credit. Most of my colleagues across the state and nationally agree that we're only beginning to tap the wealth of information and resources that can tell us about Louisiana women and how their lives and work have intersected with the diverse fields that women's studies includes: literature, history, sociology, psychology, communications, political science, environmental studies, visual arts, music, health sciences, religion, civic and urban life, journalism, even forensics, women as victims and perpetrators of crime. In fact, at a recent American Historical Association conference, noted women's historian Linda Kerber wrote to Janet Alouette at McNeese about Janet's work. She said, "The more I learn about the work of feminists in Louisiana in the 1970s, the more stunned I am that we knew nothing about this. But then the national media don't cover New Orleans unless there's a hurricane." She goes on to say, "Louisiana is especially interesting because the old civil law still shaped family law in the 1970s. For example, in Louisiana, feminists had to quash the head and master rule that shaped relations between men and women, and it took a decade of struggle to get it erased." Janet's essay on Janet Mary Riley, An Angel with Teeth, is also in our Louisiana Women, Volume 2. You notice how I'm segueing into that book often in this text. Janet Mary Riley was a devout Catholic who would not have identified as feminist. She was an attorney and the first female law professor at Loyola in New Orleans. She fought successfully to have the head and master rule dissolved in Louisiana, and this rule had given husbands total control of community property. Janet's work on Riley and her forthcoming book on second wave feminism in Louisiana uncovers an unlikely coupling of religion and social activism in our state, documenting the behind-the-scenes work of women who were members of lay religious communities. There are exciting projects going on in the state in spite of some entrenched negativity and shrinking budgets. One of these is LSU professor Alicia Long's oral history project, Listening to Louisiana Women. Funded by a Ford Foundation grant and various local entities, Alicia's project began in 2009 and culminated in a symposium in May of 2011 at the Louisiana State Museum in Baton Rouge. Long and her students interviewed nearly 50 women ranging in age from 22 to 92 from around the state about how they felt their gender affected them economically, civically, legally, and socially. The result was an amazing archive of material now housed at the LSU T. Harry Williams Oral History Center. One of the areas where women have been most active is in environmental efforts, which blossomed in the 1970s. Environmental activist Peggy Franklin spoke for the women who became the voices of their communities by embracing the health of the entire state. Often enduring ridicule and scorn, these women were instrumental in creating awareness of environmental abuses by chemical plants in Louisiana that were and are ruining the groundwater in various communities. These women eventually forced industries to alter their business operations and restore the affected areas. Their oral histories are collected in Susan Tucker's 2013 book, Women Pioneers of the Louisiana Environmental Movement, published by University Press of Mississippi. Louisiana, with its Afro-Caribbean roots, its hybrid religious customs, its festivals, continues to have resonance in women's studies. And this role emerges in the diverse cast of women characters who continue to emerge in the drama of Louisiana history. Recent books have treated the Ursuline nuns' arrival in New Orleans in the early 18th century and their subsequent role in educating women. Emily Clark's book, Masterless Mistresses, The New Orleans Ursulines and the Development of a New World Society, 1727 to 1834, treats this topic. Similar works have also studied the arrival of the casket girls in New Orleans in the early 18th century to pleasure the large number of French male settlers in the city. Free women of color who served at the pleasure of their owners and lovers. Some recent books on Louisiana reflect the turn in American and Southern studies more generally, and that is what's called the transatlantic or global focus, that traces the networks of connections linking Southern states to the slave trade in places like Haiti and Saint-Domingue. Emily Clark's book about the Octoroon subculture, The Strange History of the American Quadroon, Free Women of Color in the Revolutionary Atlantic World, published by University of North Carolina Press, argues for how central the quadroon figure has been in the mythologizing of New Orleans. And I quote from her intro to the book, and I also brought a copy of that book too. 21st century travel literature upholds the practice of enticing tourists to New Orleans with tales of quadroons. She quotes from a popular travel website. The quadroons met here were young unmarried women of legendary beauty. A gentleman would select a favorite beauty and with her mother's approval buy her a house and support her as his mistress. This practice, known as placage, was unique to New Orleans at the time. So that's one of the marketing tools for getting people to come to New Orleans and enjoy the history. Continuing the focus on New Orleans, that great Southern Babylon, as it was called, is Alicia Long's book, The Great Southern Babylon, Sex, Race, and Respectability in New Orleans. Because of being a center for tolerated prostitution and legal prostitution briefly, and the region's largest slave market, New Orleans and its red light district, Storyville, provided a transgressive space where people from all social classes, ethnicities, and races mingled intimately and casually. One of the most recent and most exciting directions that research on Louisiana women has taken is in their civic and club work, cultural work. Organizations run by women were doing significant cultural work beneath the social facades of book clubs or bridge clubs. My own current book project began with writing on New Orleans writer Grace King and finding out her connection to Le Petit Salon, one of the oldest and still surviving women's and culture clubs in New Orleans. My research took me back to a deteriorating French Quarter in the early 20th century and the remarkable efforts of King and other women to help save it. I was lucky to find at an online antiquarian bookseller site a 40-page booklet detailing the history of Le Petit Salon from its beginnings to 1975. I bought it, and I discovered that Grace King and her fellow members of the book club incorporated, sold stock, and with the proceeds bought one of the crumbling houses in the French Quarter on St. Peter Street, the Victor David House, which still stands and is still the home for Le Petit Salon and its meetings. They refurbished this classic Greek Revival mansion and in the process began historic preservation in the French Quarter in the early 20th century. This kind of civic and cultural work by women in the South has remained largely hidden and unknown, but it clearly constituted an enabling mechanism for women who couldn't vote, but could nevertheless exercise considerable financial control and power within their communities. Beth Willinger's essay in Louisiana Women, Volume 2, on the Christian Women's Exchange in New Orleans traces similar civic and humanitarian work done by socially prominent and wealthy women in New Orleans to help needy women by giving them a place to live and a venue for their arts and crafts. Taking their cue from northern cities like Philadelphia and New York, the women of New Orleans met at the St. Charles Hotel in 1888, wrote a charter, and assembled a board. They got newspaper space to publicize their work in the New Orleans Daily Picayune, then edited by a woman, Eliza Jane Nicholson, and ultimately they gained patronage from the Women's Department of the 1884-85 Cotton Centennial Exposition in New Orleans in Audubon Park. Pam Tyler's 2016 book, just out from LSU Press, New Orleans Women and the Poydras Home, documents similar charitable work connected to what was then the Poydras Asylum, an orphanage for young girls. Using significant archival material, she follows the institution from its antebellum origins to Reconstruction and into the obsolescence of children's homes in the mid-20th century. Poydras House is now a retirement and assisted living community. Continuing this literary detective work, a recent book by Mickey Pfeffer from University of New Orleans, Mickey's right here in the front row, documents the events surrounding the 1885 Cotton Centennial Exposition, or World's Fair, in Audubon Park, which was the city's coming out party to the rest of the nation. Southern ladies and suffragists, Julia Ward Howe and women's rights at the 1884 New Orleans World's Fair, which I also wrote a copy of, tells the amazing story of a collaboration between Northern and Southern women to mount a women's department at the 1884 World's Fair. The expo called on the talents of New Orleans women, but most of these women did not have the managerial skill and expertise to organize a women's department. So they swallowed their pride and asked 65-year-old New England abolitionist and suffragist Julia Ward Howe to come down from New England with her cadre of activist women to help them. And let me just read a brief paragraph. Early Thursday morning, December 11, 1884, a southbound train on the L&N line steamed westerly over the 3-mile bridge at Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, carrying Julia Ward Howe to New Orleans and the presidency of the Women's Department. She had never visited the Deep South, so she marveled at the quasi-tropical foliage outside her window, the lush orange trees in full bloom, magnolias of great size, and palmettos with prickly spikes. It was a world unknown to her, physically and socially. Yet she looked forward to the adventure with the excitement she brought to every project, especially those that paired women and advancement. Apparently, she had no inkling that thorny ladies awaited her in the Crescent City. You can imagine the resentment Southern women felt at having to import a Northern woman to teach them how to organize a World's Fair women's department. With high anticipation, she had left her cozy home on Boston's Beacon Hill more than a week earlier, stopped in New York for her youngest daughter Maud to join her, and headed for the World's Industrial Cotton Centennial Exposition. Julia Ward Howe was no novice in exposition leadership, but her experience was regional. Here was a chance to perform on a world stage. Would adulation await her? And you have to read the book to find the answer to that question. Howe was bold and brassy. She offended the sensibilities of men who feared their wives and daughters might turn into her. The resulting story is a fascinating one of crossing firmly entrenched sectional boundaries, rising above cultural prejudices, and in the process helping to bring about the unity and reconciliation post-Civil War America needed. If not for this seminal cultural event, these progressive ideas about women's roles and abilities might have taken years to drift south. Grace King's biographer Robert Bush points out that women like her needed the model of an aggressive woman with a career behind her to overcome doubts about the propriety of a Southern lady earning a living. And Grace King learned her lesson well. The Women's Department of the Cotton Centennial Exposition showcased the handiwork, arts and crafts, and literary talent of both black and white women and brought New Orleans women out of their comfortable bourgeois homes. As such, it marked a watershed moment in Southern women's history, a catalyzing force in their later civic and cultural involvement. But it was a mutually beneficial experience for women both North and South, because it also educated New England activist women about the most exotic city in the most exotic region of the country, the South. One of my favorite images from the period is Julia Ward Howe presiding over the opening ceremonies of the centennial, seated in a throne-like chair whose back was the horns of two Texas longhorn steers. Nikki Pfeffer is in our audience, as I pointed out, and when I'm done, she'll tell you briefly about an ongoing interactive digital project that came from this book. If you happen to read the New York Times Sunday, March 6th, you might have noticed that the book review section contained a front page review of two books by a UNO scholar, Anne Boyd Rue. One is a biography of 19th century American writer Constance Fenimore Woolson, writer, friend, and mentor to Henry James, and an edition of Woolson's stories, Miss Grief and Other Stories. The review is by noted Emily Dickinson scholar Brenda Wineapple, and it praises the feminist scholarship of Rue and her efforts to resurrect this pioneering woman writer who chose a literary career over the more conventional options of marriage and motherhood. Rue is also at work on tracing the literary and cultural effects of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. In talking to and emailing my colleagues across the state in our own campus, I was struck by the variety of research efforts in place to fill in the gaps of Louisiana women's history. And I just want to put in a plug for a book that's not about Louisiana women, but it's by two Louisiana women scholars, myself and my colleague Jo Davis McElligott from the English department. And the book is one that Michael Martin mentioned. It's called Small Screen Souths, Interrogating the Televisual Archive. That's a properly clunky academic title, right? And Jo Davis McElligott's essay is on True Blood and the depiction of Louisiana in that show, and it's called God Hates Fangs. And I can't remember the subtitle. And mine, as you heard, is called Redneck Feng Shui, Duck Dynasty, and the Other Louisiana. And when I was doing research for that essay, it was so interesting. They sent it out for Outside Reader report, and the Outside Reader said I didn't provide enough proof for the difference between North and South Louisiana. To me, that's so obvious, but obviously to someone from outside the state or the region, it's not so obvious. So I did more research, and what I found out, and we all know the difference, right? That there's a dividing line between North and South. What I found in my research was that in the 1990s, there was actually a cultural exchange program between students at a Shreveport high school and students at an Opelousas high school. Now, I think that was a convincing piece of evidence for the cultural and psychic split between North and South Louisiana, a cultural exchange program within the state. So that was kind of fun. My colleague and friend Emily Toth at LSU, biographer of Kate Chopin, is working on a book called First Fictions by Louisiana Women Writers. And in it, she'll focus on 5 significant Louisiana women writers and their first book-length fictions, which I think is a fascinating idea, either novels or short story collections. Starting with Grace King's Monsieur Mott, she'll discuss Kate Chopin's At Fault, Alice Dunbar Nelson's The Goodness of St. Roch and Other Stories, Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, which I'm teaching right now in my Louisiana literature class. And she'll end with Sheila Bosworth's expose of uptown New Orleans, Almost Innocent. An upcoming exhibit this spring at the Historic New Orleans Collection, which is always a vital and rich center for research on women, is called Voices of Progress, 20 Women Who Changed New Orleans. And it will showcase city leaders like Caroline Merrick, Eliza Jane Nicholson, Aretha Castle Haley, who I think was in Volume 1 of Louisiana Women, Lindy Boggs, and Dorothy Mae Taylor. And of course, on our own campus, Mary Farmer Kaiser, Dean of the Graduate School, has co-edited with Shannon Freistack Volume 2 of Louisiana Women from University of Georgia Press. This second volume is a rich and eclectic collection of essays about women across centuries, from the women of Congo Square to Lucinda Williams. It will open up new avenues of inquiry and research for future students and scholars. Amy Brown from Psychology has a long-standing interest in researching violence against women. Her current research involves perceptions of rape victims by others, including what she calls bystander attitudes and behaviors when confronted by an act of sexual violence. The results of her research suggest that men are strongly influenced by what they think others think in regard to their own willingness to help. She hopes to turn her results into a community-based education and awareness program to heighten responsiveness to such situations. And I'd like to showcase 2 of our English department PhDs whose books have come out recently. Donna Onabane, whose book, The House That Sugarcane Built, tells the story of the sugarcane dynasty, the Louisiana Bourgeois. I think we have an endowed professorship here at UL named for this family, and I think Michael Martin holds it. Am I right? Okay. And Claire Maines, whose book, Out of the Shadow of Leprosy, tells the personal story of her grandfather Edmund and his 4 siblings who contracted what was called Hansen's disease and were housed at the Carville Leprosarium. Claire draws on her grandfather's letters, discovered years after his death, to paint a portrait of the man and the institution at Carville. And something a little funkier, for those of us who spend lots of time online, there's a new online literary magazine being published in Louisiana called Quaint, a quarterly women's literary magazine. And its description notes that it publishes dynamic, arresting, and transgressive poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction by female and gender non-binary writers. Accordingly, we are trans-inclusive, their statement says. We are strongly committed to publishing work from traditionally marginalized writers, giving voice to the strange, the weird, and the unsettling. So that's Quaint, a quarterly women's literary magazine. It's online, but I think there have been a couple of print issues. It's come out in 5 issues so far. So women's studies is alive and well in Louisiana, as you can see. That being said, there are areas for future study by students and scholars in many disciplines. Possible topics include women in music, lesbian and gay culture in Louisiana, women in politics, women in food, women's activism outside the New Orleans area, women newspaper editors besides Eliza Nicholson, women in religious organizations, women writing in French, African American women's club work in New Orleans and across the state, women in the media. Women's studies has fertile ground in our state, and the discipline and field are enlarging to embrace the diversity of women's activities, secular and spiritual, public and private. Tell About the South, one of William Faulkner's Northern characters, challenges his Southern roommate at Harvard. What's it like there? What do they do there? Women's studies research can help tell about Louisiana and help us preserve our rich culture and history for the future. Thank you. And now I want Mickey to just tell us about this digital project that came out of your book. It's called Beautiful Sisterhood, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It is a project in the works and not up yet because it's going to take a long time. One of the invitations that Julie Ward Howe made to women across the country when she engaged them to bring their exhibits to the city of New Orleans was to bring the books that women had written. And during the time of the World's Fair in New Orleans, the 6 months there, the women amassed 1,400 books, magazines, and newspapers that women either wrote, edited, or published. And at the end of the fair, Maud Howe, who had headed up this literary section within the women's department, the books were arranged by states rather than by subject. She donated 800 of those books to a circulating library in New Orleans at the Southern Art Union. And Susan Tucker from Newcomb and I were doing an interview one day, and she came up with the idea of doing this digital project of all the books that were in the literary section, because we know what they are. They were listed in Julia Ward Howe's report and catalog. So we've begun to work with COLAT grant students who know about technology, which neither of us do. My partner now is not Susan Tucker, who's moved on because she's retired, but Kate Adams. She really is taking the lead in this project because she's on Tulane campus teaching women's studies there. So what we want to do is create this digital site where visitors there will be able to go see all the books that were in the department, touch a spine or an entry, and up pops the cover of the book and its genre and a blurb about what it is, and connecting it to other books that were there. So some of them were traditional, some were pretty radical for the time. So this is what we're trying to do. It's not up, but if you're teaching a class that you might want to use this project as an assignment for your class, this is what Kate Adams and Ann Boyd Rue both did last semester, and each of their students took one of the books and wrote it up and submitted it. So we would like to have your input, because the students got really excited about this project. It's like it attaches something to an assignment that makes sense. And they were very excited, and they get a chance to have a published piece. So the site will be called Beautiful Sisterhood of Books, because that is what Maud Howe called this collection when she donated it to the Southern Art Union. So I hope you'll watch for it and participate too. Thank you very much. Also, I just want to say I'm transcribing the letters of Grace King, a fascinating figure, so I look forward to publishing those in the future.